Maybe some people mess up horribly,
Oh yeah, would be nice.
like Niels, and then you can just get positions that way.
Smell for it, right?
Exactly.
Hey guys, as you might have heard, there is a new game on the horizon, which is called Rennsport, which is German for racing, more or less. And there was a summit this weekend where I think about 100 people from all over the sim racing scene were involved. People from Arfact iRacing, not so much Race Room, I believe, ACC. I think there was some teams certainly missing there. But overall, a huge amount of, well, a huge gathering of professional drivers. And we all had a go at the game. And I think, just to cut it short a bit, everybody was surprised that the game was actually working. I think everybody came there with very low expectations. And that probably helped us to, be surprised as well. But let's have a quick rundown before we get to see some footage. I brought my GoPro. They had recording rigs up there, but I didn't really have the time, nor did I have a hard drive with me, so we're just gonna go with a GoPro footage. I have a lap of Max Benecke recorded. I have something from Mitchell that you're gonna have one of my own races that we did. Yes, races, which means there was multiplayer already working in the LAN setting that we had. So we had something like, they said, 2 milliseconds of ping. So also the contact model was kind of probably looking a bit better than it would online for the time being. But yeah, we'll go there one by one. So maybe I just play the lab of Benecke right away. We don't really need the sound of it because on the GoPro, obviously there isn't. So we're just going to look at what he does there. This is where we're at. I'm actually going to go back to the start. So we're in Hockenheim. You can see we have the VRS rigs there. So pretty much what the Coanda team is using in their esports facility or hub and home, whatever you want to call it. They do have this audio thing there. This is the new VRS rim, which I think isn't on sale yet. Of course, the VRS base and the VRS pedals, which are nice. Just that we all had to use the softest blue spring. Would have been better to have something more stiff, more firm, which is what I desire. I guess a lot of people do, essentially. But yeah, super stiff rig. Comfortable seat, more or less. There were 3 different ones, like a very wide one for the XXL people around, a medium one, and a rather tight one. But all that doesn't really matter. What you can see already on the screen then is they had the ultra wides of Samsung, and let's just move it forward a bit. That's not accelerated, that's the normal speed. And you can see here on the sides already the involvement of ESL. And I might be getting ahead a bit of myself, but you could see during the loading phase of the game that those ads on the side, they were kind of loading separately from the rest of the track. So it kind of feels like there's an additional layer to every track that loads the sponsors and partners displayed on that track. So it's not fixed to like the sponsors aren't part of the track, but they are an additional layer, which should give huge opportunity for well, adding sponsors, exchanging them, adding whoever is doing a league race on that game, which gives a huge amount more exposure, makes broadcasts a lot more enticing for brands to get involved, which is the whole idea, I think, behind Rennsport, which is thinking esports first. And this is, I think, actually where most of the sim racing titles are lacking. They are not thinking in the esports realm. They have the sponsors from the real life. They have whatever is there on the laser scans, but all these companies that are visible on the tracks, they're not paying. So there's always a lack of money in sim racing because there's little exposure to have. And now this game makes use of the flexibility that you have in the digital world. So I think this is the first glimpse of what we can expect Rennsport to be on the commercial side of esports. But let's just roll it forward. It's like a 2-minute clip of the full lap. Take a look at Beneke. I mean, you can see by the graphics, I won't go too much into it because this is, I think, just Unreal 5. It looks fine. They're probably going to optimize it in the next 2 years until the game comes out. So there's not too much to moan about that. It just looks fine to me. And for a racing game, I don't really need the whole shiny and blurry and whatever stuff. I just need to see the track and feel immersed. And I think that's about fine. You can see the mirrors are not yet really working. They probably reduced the quality here to ramp up the FPS a little. Again, optimization issues, I guess. There's only the virtual mirror that was working, a bit low FPS. You can see a bit of the interface here already with a sector 1, 2, 3. The delta reminds me a lot of iRacing. The numbers, though, were jumping under 100, a bit up and down, similar to what we know of ACC, which then makes me kind of think that it's more an Unreal issue that we have a somewhat incorrect delta in ACC. So it's not down to the program as being unable or whatever. It seems to be an Unreal, like a core Unreal issue that the delta isn't as precise. So we'll see how Rennsport manages that. So going forward then, see all the banners, Rennsport, ESL, they don't seem to be tied to whatever the track had initially. Maybe you also take a look down at the right corner here. You have the throttle bar above the brake bar and the force feedback bar. Plus there's a steering wheel indicating how much he's doing. See, initial braking always very harsh, deep trailing, right back on the throttle to keep the car rotating. We're looking at the M4 GT3 here, which has to be driven a bit differently. So we'll have a look once we look at the footage from Mitchell de Jong, who was in the Porsche, if that car behaves a bit differently. I felt like it did, so hopefully we can see this in the oval there in the bottom right corner there too. Overall, you can see the car moves a lot. There's a lot of bumps on the road it responds to, and it all feels kind of okay at first sight. Driving, feeling wise, I think I described it in the post I already did on YouTube, where the game feels a bit like an in-between of all the games. Has parts of iRacing where you really have to trail deep to keep the car rotating, be on the power to keep it rotating and alive, keep the speed up right away. There's no coasting phases, but then you have this feeling of AMS2 or R factor somewhat, where you can really push deep into the tire and the limit is a rather wide range, which you really need to get a feeling for to exploit it, but it's not as hypersensitive going above the limit as iRacing, for example. So you definitely can lose grip, regain grip, and the regaining grip part is really something that differentiates it from iRacing. So yeah, Beneke Lab is already done here. Let me have a quick look about the recording I made from Mitchell, which is a tiny bit longer. So we're going here right into the race. It gets a bit of a tap there from the side. So we're in the multiplayer now. We're also in the Porsche. Don't think we have the overlay nicely in the frame here because his nose was just a tiny bit too large. So we're just going to see the Porsche, a bit of draft. You could feel that certainly. They had a nice feature as well, where when we were in single player, or rather hot lapping mode, just to practice on our own, the other cars were actually there, just that they were invisible, not just ghosted, they were invisible, but you could still hear them. So even the kind of single player sessions were somewhat multiplayer, which just indicates there's more flexibility here than what we know of the other games, potentially. Curbs might, at some cases, be a bit exaggerated. I'm not sure we can actually see this here. Sometimes you would hit a sausage and the curb just goes flying right away. Sometimes you'd have contact with a car and both cars get sent a bit far, but on other occasions it was perfectly fine. So, I mean, you're looking at it and they're actually racing side by side and people risking things. So the fundament here really works. And I think this is also what they focus a lot on. They get a kind of a minimal viable product here, which is a single track, 2 cars on that occasion. He was working the car there quite a bit, and they really focused on narrowing this very small use case down to a functioning product. So I'm not sure there are other tracks, not sure other tracks are working. Well, in fact, they showed us the Goodwood circuit that we were driving with some electric Porsche. Was a debatable experience, as it was very, very bumpy and the car didn't like it at all. Either way, getting carried away from myself here a bit. We were having a lot of fun because the damage model wasn't yet existent here. But you could see a lot of detail. For example, if you look at the Porsche ahead just in the chicane there, you were able to see that the front wheels are actually turned in of the other car as well. So it's a good amount of detail from the outside that you can see on the other cars. You can definitely see the shadows being a bit weird still, not yet perfect, I would say. But again, I'm not really concerned here because the game is in an early stage. But then on the other hand, they were calling it alpha stage, more I think as part of a potential measurement to deal with any disasters from this event, right? So if something goes wrong, you can always say, hey, this is a pre-alpha, so let's not say this is gone totally wrong or whatever. So you have kind of an excuse, but they didn't really need it. On the other hand, everything on that weekend ran really smooth. I don't think we had a single game crash. I think as it wasn't really competing, right? But as a participant in that event, you heard very little, felt very little of any potential hiccups of the game underneath. So it was, yeah, I think let's roll this back here. Because I think just pausing it right there. The braking marker somewhat here where the green stuff starts again on the right. So just take a look at the brake trace here. So on the BMW before, you were really aggressive for a long period of time, then did the trail braking into the corner just to somehow get the rear end. On the Porsche, it's much more sensitive. The rear is much more likely on its own to go for the corner, which is why you see him working a lot on the wheel there as he starts the trail braking. Hard on the brakes initially, opening up the brakes, and then immediately the rear steps out. So there's similar traits that the Porsche has to the one in ACC, just it doesn't snap as fiercely. It doesn't seem to be as aero sensitive as it is in ACC, but also we are not completely unaware of what the setup on the car here was, right? We didn't have access to that. We could see on some screens that they were showing us that, yes, setups exist. There is a huge amount of options, more options than GT3 cars have. So they can probably fit other cars too that, use more setup options like the third spring, for example, or things like that. But we didn't touch anything like that. Potentially also didn't work just yet in detail. For example, the tire pressures behaved a bit weirdly. I think they only went up when braking and decreased when accelerating. So this was totally not working yet. It was kind of just a number on the screen. But other than that, it was all about the initial driving behavior, right? And then if the pressures and temperatures all change something to that, okay, it will be in a more subtle fashion, but the base is all there, I would say, for the time being. So yeah, now we watched little race action here with Mitchell. You could see that there was a fair bit of contact, which has probably helped with people exploiting there isn't a damage model yet. Now let's go for the footage that I did then right from my head. I'm not sure, this is not actually a race, I think. So this was the hot lapping mode here, more or less. Let's go forward a bit to when I start actually driving. And maybe this gives you another feel. Let's have a look again. So I'm in the M4, of course, down here at bars of the pedals. The rigs were set a bit differently. Sometimes you'd have a brake pedal that needed like 80 kilos, some needed quite a bit less, so it was tricky changing rigs sometimes. Either way, you felt immersed in the game and it was quite intuitive to drive. Maybe the POV settings weren't right just yet, but nothing of that was really bothering, I'd have to say. The sounds, they were overall a bit dull. They clearly didn't focus a lot on that yet. So what we basically had was just the engine, a bit of gear whine, and a bit of curbs here and there. But it all felt like there wasn't too much detail to the sound, right? The engines, they just rev too cleanly. They weren't too much impacted by road imperfections or by going over the curbs or so. So you didn't get a huge amount of feedback on the audio side. You also had no chance really to hear really hear what the ABS or TC were doing. And I think especially on ACC, we're used a lot to hearing what the electronics do to the car. And this was really not that present here yet. So we went a lot by the colors on the dash popping up. So on the sides here, you'd have the ABS and TC lights coming on. Probably should happen now. Fully on power, no slides, and was a bit too clean there, I guess. There's a car parking. Maybe on the exit of that one. Other than that, probably the braking for the next corner should the latest bring up the ABS light. So just look out for those LEDs here on the side, what happens on the braking. Okay, not too much. Then let's dial it back. Actually, it felt like when I was there that the LEDs were coming on. Let's try something different. We have the same down here, so I mean you can't really read it, but there is an ABS light and there's a TC light. So similar again, what we have in ACC. And as I hit the brake, the ABS should come on. Yeah, there you go. The weird thing is that the TC also kind of does something, so it feels like it's an ABS of the rear tires somewhat tied to the TC, so some things are weird, but it's somewhat working yet. But this is the only feedback mechanism that you have. It's purely visual. There's nothing on the wheel about the TC, about the ABS yet. There's nothing in the audio, as I said. It's solely in terms of visuals, sometimes on the dash, sometimes in the HUD down there. And the same really goes for the force feedback. It just has the main resistance somewhat in there. It indicates the oversteer, but it's not like the same amount of speed sensitive and resistance that you have in ACC, for example. So overall, the resistance on the rear is rather similar throughout the whole speed range, which I find a bit odd because I would think the faster you go, the less willing the tire is to change direction, so the resistance gets harder. And this is also what I feel most comfortable with in ACC, judging what the car is doing. So there's a huge amount of detail that ACC, for example, has in the force feedback that wasn't here yet. So also there, we were mainly driving on visual feedback rather than the force feedback outside of anything that was oversteer, really. So you didn't have a front axle too much, but you had a really good feeling of the rear axle. When it stepped out, you got something in the force feedback. But how much you used the front tire, there was very little indication telling you how much there might be still left in the tire, or if you were overusing it, for example. So even if you go fully to one side or the other, there wasn't this high frequency vibration, for example, that we have on ACC. So there's a few things certainly on the game to polish. Lap times, I think, seem more or less all right. Didn't seem anything exaggerated. Speeds in the corners all feel very credible. Overall, how the car behaved, lost skip, gain grip, I think that was all fine. The main questions that arise in the end is if they can make it a workable game and if they can actually attract a user base, if there is a user base that is willing to change from their game to another game. For what purpose exactly, right? So we don't know fully what the content is going to be. They say they are pretty open. They don't have a lot of manufacturers yet on board, yet they are open to modding, which would mean there potentially are a lot of cars. But then I don't know how they deal modding with maybe official license from manufacturers who'd probably say, yeah, if you want to have our car, you can have the mod car from whatever. So I guess there are a few unanswered questions on licensing part, which we will see only in the future. What is still to happen now in, well, the next months and years is that they will go into a closed beta phase where most likely streamers, content creators, and pro sim racers will be involved. But then later there will be a public beta, which of course, I guess they don't really have a rough date. They don't have a precise date for that. I guess they have their internal milestones that they want to reach, and overall we're looking still at a 2-year-long timeline before the game will be in a final release, I guess. But throughout the whole weekend, there were a lot of people involved. The lead programmer was there, a lot of the marketing people was there, the CEO was there. They were all really open and they were looking for the talk. They were not just being there and nodding or whatever. It really felt like they were interested in what we had to say. And we had a longer Q&A session, something like an hour or whatever, where everybody could bring their questions. They could answer most of them, not all of them. I guess around the business setup, for example, where the initial funding all comes from. If you have a 4-year endeavor with a probably large programming team, there's some money that needs to be invested, and sooner or later someone wants to have a return. Which brings us to the financing or payment model for the users in the end, which is something they said they're really still open about. Everything is on the table. It could be a subscription. It could be a single payment. It could be a per content payment. It could be a combination of several things. So I guess this is all still very much up for debate. I guess they are aware generally about all the other games in the community, which means they know the models, obviously the payment models from all the existing games. They know some of the issues apparently from the other games. Looking at the overlay that we saw, you can see they were tapping into the other games, like the Delta bar looked very close to the one from iRacing. The pedal bars, for example, certainly looked a bit more like ACC. So they were taking things from here and there, and the same really goes for the way the cars drove, which feels somewhat of an in-between of all these games. It might just be my head and it never has been their attention or whatever. But this is kind of where I right now place that sim, which also is a risky thing in the end, and I want to close it with that. Because if the game kind of has something from everything, it can lead to everybody being happy or nobody. So let's see how this game progresses. I think we were all impressed with how far it already has, and it has definitely got our attention. And we will certainly have a look how this game develops further in the future, watch its progress closely, because I think the general idea of thinking esports first has a big opportunity, just because this is something that has been neglected by really all sim developers in the last 20 or so years. So with that, I want to end it, hoping to see more from the game soon, more new stuff from the game soon, waiting for the feedback process that they're going to, well, that they want to collect from us. And yeah, so far they're pretty open to show this game in the public. So hopefully there will be more to share. We'll learn more without having, to wait too long, without them being too secretive. And that's it. We're heading back to ACC for the time being, because the competition is up with Spa 24 in a couple weeks and Nürburgring Sprint in 1.5 weeks. So bye everyone.